We all saw the tragedy of the Boston Marathon bombing play out on our screens. But the real story, well, that's about a failure that happened completely in secret. It's about a crucial warning that somehow got lost in the shuffle, and it raises a really tough question that still hangs over U.S. intelligence. Did we actually learn the lessons from 9/11?
So let's set the scene. It's April 15th, 2013. It's Patriots Day in Boston, which, if you don't know, is a massive citywide party. It's the day of the Boston Marathon. The energy is electric. But then, in just a few seconds, all of that celebration just shatters. It turns into absolute chaos.
I think we all remember the core details, right? They're just burned into our minds. You've got the finish line on Boylston Street, and then boom, 2 explosions, only 12 seconds apart, maybe 200 yards from each other, just tearing through the crowd.
The devastation was just unimaginable. 3 people lost their lives, one of them an 8-year-old boy, and more than 260 others were injured. As the city was trying to pick up the pieces, the search for how this happened started, and what they found was a failure almost as shocking as the attack itself. Okay, so after the attack, a huge investigation kicks off, a manhunt like the city had never seen before. But here's the thing, the most shocking part of this whole story, it's not what happened after the bombing. It's about what didn't happen years before.
And that brings us to the one question that just hangs over this entire tragedy. A question that investigators wrestled with for years. Could this have been stopped? Was there a chance to prevent this? You know, you'd think the answer would come out in some classified report, right? Nope. It started to come out a year later in a public hearing in Congress, of all places. And what came out was just jaw-dropping. I mean, just let that sink in for a second. The top cop in the entire city of Boston, he had absolutely no idea that one of the future bombers had been looked at by the FBI for 2 whole years. The people on the street, the local police, were totally in the dark.
So you have to ask, how does a breakdown like that even happen? Well, it wasn't just one single mistake. It was more like a chain with one broken link after another.
So here's how it all went down. First, the Russians send a tip to the FBI. They say, hey, this guy Tamerlan Tsarnaev, he might be a radical. Okay, so step 2, the FBI does an assessment, they talk to him, his family. Step 3, they don't find any direct link to terrorism, so they close the case. And right there, step 4, that's the critical failure. The information just hits a wall. It's filed away, it's siloed, and it never ever makes it to the Boston police, the guys who are actually on the ground.
And this is what's so incredible and honestly so frustrating about this whole thing. This exact problem, agencies not talking to each other, this was supposed to be fixed. This was the core lesson from 9/11. Our entire national security apparatus was rebuilt from the ground up to prevent this very thing from happening again.
Think back to the 9/11 Commission report. What was one of its biggest findings? That agencies weren't connecting the dots. The CIA had information, the FBI had other information, but they weren't sharing. It was all stuck in these bureaucratic silos, and we all know how that story ended.
So after 9/11, the idea was to completely change the culture, to move away from this old-school need-to-know mentality where everyone keeps their cards close to their chest. The new mantra was supposed to be need to share. Information was meant to flow like a river between federal, state, and local partners to stop threats before they happen.
And look, we threw everything at this problem. A ton of new laws were passed. The Patriot Act, we created the whole Department of Homeland Security, the Intelligence Reform Act. All of this was designed specifically to break down those walls. And yet, here we are, almost 12 years later, and the Boston bombing proves those dangerous gaps were still there. Okay, so if a whole decade of new laws and reforms didn't completely fix the problem, what's next? What's the solution? How do you actually get different agencies with different cultures to talk to each other? Well, a big part of the answer was to double down on something called fusion centers. The concept is actually pretty simple. You literally put everyone in the same room. You get an analyst from the FBI, someone from the state police, a detective from the local PD, and you have them work side by side, sharing what they know in real time. These centers are meant to be the physical bridge that connects all those different agencies. But as you might guess, it's not a perfect solution. These fusion centers have their own set of problems.
For one, there's mission creep. They start out focused on terrorism, but then they're looking at all kinds of crime, and their focus gets watered down. Some of them just turn into data vacuums, sucking in tons of information but not actually producing useful intelligence. And of course, there are huge privacy and civil liberties concerns hanging over the whole thing. The bottom line is, just putting people in a new building doesn't magically fix a deep-seated cultural problem.
So this all comes back around to the fundamental problem, right? The core issue that was there before 9/11, and as we've seen, was still there on the day of the Boston bombing. The Boston bombing is really just this painful real-world case study, and it forces us to ask a really hard question that is still so relevant today. Have we actually fixed the problem? Have we closed the gaps that stop the right information from getting to the right people at the right time? Because creating that perfect chain, from a tip from halfway around the world to an FBI agent to a local cop walking a beat, that is an incredibly difficult thing to do. And as we saw in Boston, the cost of just one broken link in that chain, well, it's measured in human lives.